Good evening, everyone. This is Mel Boynton from Southern California speaking, and we welcome you to this advocacy committee and update for advocacy leads for the United Nations Association. Our call is being recorded tonight so that it can be listened to by others who cannot join us tonight. We appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules. We have an action-packed call tonight. We'll have a update from Chris Wadley and from Jordy Hannum. Rachel Pittman is also on the line. And if we have time before the hour is up, we could talk about anything else we might need for our in-district meetings we hope to have in the next 30 to 45 days. With that, may I hand it off to you, Chris, and give us a quick update, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mel, and thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us tonight. Basically, I just want to give you a couple of quick updates from the UNA USA side before we get into kind of the real meat of the discussion, which is talking about what's literally happening day by day here in Washington on the issues that we care so much about. But I want to start by just, first of all, thanking everyone. One thing that you've probably noticed is there have been a much higher rate of advocacy actions, those kind of email actions where we're asking you to click and respond on something since the inauguration than ever before, or at least ever since UNA became part of the UN Foundation, and I'm guessing ever in the existence of our association. And that's just for the obvious reason, for the executive orders that have been batted around about defunding the UN for the actions on the Hill to deal with the same subject, but more importantly, because of the other actions by the White House and considered by Congress that threaten our values, that more than just the funding of the UN, that ultimately threaten our values as Americans who believe in a universal premise, you know, the idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that was there at the founding. We carry that forward into our belief that there are certain core human rights values that are at our heart as Americans and that we have to support in the context of the U.S.-UN relationship. And all of that's been under threat. And that's why you've been seeing so many email actions for us on the President's executive order on refugees, other things. But that's mainly to say that there's so much going on that we're having to revisit some of our fundamental assumptions as advocates, that we're having to step beyond the comfortable space of having just a regular series of let's get everybody out and maybe once a year do an in-district meeting at their chapter, and then let's try to get as many people to Washington as possible for Lobby Day. Those are the things that served us well up until this very moment. But now we got to do those and much more. And we've got to kind of take the gloves off as we do it. We've got to be more edgy and focused in our messaging. We've got to be more edgy in how we connect to the kind of righteous outrage that's going on around us in a lot of the partner organizations. We will still need to be focused on what is still a nonpartisan aspiration, that there are certainly Republicans who believe in the UN. Some of them were speaking about it today on the Hill. But ultimately, we've got to be much more edgy and focused and be willing to push back more, to join some marches, to join other organizations. And that means that the kind of three things that we're asking our members to do, in addition to responding to these digital calls to action, which are going to come once a week or so. I mean, this isn't going to stop. There's going to be something every week that we need to respond on. And we need to get our folks used to that and not waiting around for things, but expecting them. So we really need to connect. We need to connect to Congress through responding to those email actions, but we need to connect to like-minded organizations around us and figure out how our beliefs and our work with the UN could connect to their beliefs on women's rights or LGBT rights or other things. We've always done that. You know, that's always been part of what chapters do, but we need to do it in a much more focused way because the whole nation's marching right now. And in fact, we're going to have a meeting like that with like-minded NGOs that the UN Foundation's hosting in our office just tomorrow morning. And then we need to convene. We need to convene our chapter members and convene them in the offices of the House and Senate members' district offices in their own communities. So the in-district meetings, which have always been part of what we do, they're even more urgent. We really need to take those recess breaks that happen in April and August when our members of Congress come back from Washington. They're there. They're doing town hall meetings. They're doing constituency outreach. We need to convene with them, convene our members together, bring groups of 3 or 4 members or larger, and meet face to face, because that's actually our best chance of reaching our members of Congress. And then we need to converge on Washington. We had the largest lobby day in UN Foundation history, UNA USA history, all combined last June. We had 300 people there. We had more than 200 individual House and Senate members met with, or their offices met with, on the Hill. That's great numbers, but we got to blow the doors off of them this year. That means that we need chapters to be thinking now about who from their number is willing to make the sacrifice to come to Washington at their own expense, or maybe with a little help from the chapter budget. Who from their number, and can that number be larger? Those are the things we're going to need to do. But thank you for sticking with us and responding so much. Our message about the UN funding crisis and that response where we said, give Nikki Haley a chance, don't slash the funding to the UN. We had almost 1,000 advocates respond to that. That's fantastic for an organization that only has 20,000 people or so in its membership. So with there, let me pause, Mel, and turn it back over to you. And I think Jordy's queued up, ready to tell us what's happening on the Hill.
Well, thank you, Chris. We appreciate your leadership and your wise words these months as we face the new White House and new legislature. Jordy, I think we have some specific bill numbers, and if you could give us an update on your perspective on what's going on in the Senate and the House right now, and the White House too, if that's part of the story for you. But I'll turn it over to you, Jordy Hannum.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Mel. And let me just echo Chris's comments. Thank you to all of you. I mean, it has been an absolute whirlwind. I mean, I've been here for 8 years, and it's certainly in my time, there's nothing like it. And even for those colleagues who were here during the late 90s and the oil for food and the John Bolton days, I mean, this it's just relentless. That was kind of one issue, and this we have about 3 or 4. So I just can't thank you enough. I mean, the outreach has been incredibly important, and I'll get to that in a moment when I talk about today's hearing. But let me just give a recap briefly, just to kind of remind where we've been in just the past week. So it was just a week ago that it looked like there were going to be 2 executive orders on the UN, one that would have called for a cut in voluntary contributions by 40%. There was also a provision in there that would called for the radical shift to move all of our funding to a voluntary model, which basically would have meant a withdrawal from the UN. That was just one, and then the second one, a moratorium on any treaties. I appreciate everyone's outreach on it. I mean, we mobilized on the UNA side, on the BWC side, with our validators, and I know that had an impact. I know that from the conversations we've had with former folks in the administration, with those on the Hill, and even the New York Times reporter who broke the story tweeted out yesterday. Twitter is now the main form of communication, it seems, but in kind of citing one of the reasons that the executive order was tabled was the outreach from individuals and others. So it mattered. In terms of the prognosis for those executive orders and what's going to happen, I mean, we have been told they're quote on ice. But So I certainly don't expect them imminently. I don't expect it next week or something like that. But I would certainly not be surprised if we see them again, in the near future. So we certainly need to be kind of remain prepared. And as Chris said, that outreach over the President's Day period. I mean, the UN is still front and center in what people are talking about, and I'll get to the legislation in a second. But this executive order really raised it in terms of people's consciousness, and so our outreach, while it's still fresh, is really important. That believe in the UN, believe in funding the UN. It's vitally important. So just on the executive order front, I would also say in terms of the just kind of incomprehensible and tragic executive order on refugees and immigration. Obviously, that was signed on Friday, as I know you all know, and there has been outreach from us, really directed at Congress, and that's really the focus. I think that's very important to kind of push on Congress to say Congress, can fix this, and if that's a key issue to be pressing as well for Congress to fix that executive order, which obviously is problematic on so many different levels. So that's kind of the executive orders. We're hearing, there's been, as I'm sure if you're following the news, there's been other ones particularly related to LGBT individuals, on religious discrimination, and we're hearing all sorts of different things. And so we will certainly keep you abreast if we hear more that are central to our issues, our values. Okay, on the legislative front, so as we talked about, there a few weeks ago, Senators Graham and Cruz introduced the what's called Safeguard Israel Act, which completely defunds the UN, gets us out until the Security Council resolution is repealed. And we've done a number of outreach to members. We do know on the positive front that Senator Graham, again, who's critical in this because he's the chair of the subcommittee that has oversight and directs funding to the UN on the Senate side. He will be meeting with the Secretary General on Monday, so that's positive. And the Secretary General they've had phone conversations, and so we're hopeful that the Secretary General can kind of press on the importance of the UN's work and not to completely kneecap the organization and him. So we will update you in terms of that meeting. But anyway, the Graham Cruz is out there on the Senate side, and then this week the companion bill on the House side was introduced. Unfortunately, one of the sponsors of that is Congresswoman Kay Granger, who up until just last year was the chairwoman on the House State Foreign Operations Subcommittee. So, Senator Graham was on the Senate side and overseeing appropriations. Granger did it on the House side. So that's, problematic and a challenge that you've got senior leaders in the party and ones who oversee the funding who are calling for, a complete defunding. That's a challenge, and why, pressing both on those members but with other of their colleagues to say no, I don't want to see this happen is vitally important. So that happened just yesterday. I will say what makes me feel better about where we are is today there was a hearing which was directly related to what happened in December and what those two bills are getting at. So it was a hearing today in the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the UN, Israel, and the Palestinians, and you had a number of witnesses, who were making the case for defunding the UN and defunding the Human Rights Council and getting us out of the UN or slashing our contributions. And a month ago, if they'd had this hearing, I would have been really concerned, because in the wake of the December resolution, you had Republicans and Democrats, kind of saying, we've got to really punish the UN, quote. But because of our outreach and the pushing on the importance of the UN, and frankly because of the the executive orders and the way they went about it, in today's hearing, I was very pleased that we saw a number of positive comments and really impassioned pleas about the value of the UN and what it was doing, and talking about its humanitarian work, its peacekeeping work, its political missions, and that was both Democrats, of course, but also Republicans. So we had Republican, actually, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, you all may remember, we talked about in the past, he's one of the chairs of the Peacekeeping Caucus, but he traveled with us to Liberia, and his opening statement, he came right out the bat and said, I support the UN, I saw its work in Liberia, I saw its peacekeepers, it's a force multiplier, we shouldn't leave the UN. We had, of course, other Democrats making strong statements about the value of the UN's work across the board, and that cutting off our funding, defunding the UN. And what we also saw, and what I thought was particularly relevant, is the members who were speaking up were almost completely ones that BWC, UNA had really established relationships with. So Congresswoman Bass and talking about the support for the UN in her community, and the outreach she's received on it. Congressman Cicilline, who we took to Liberia as well. Congressman Deutsch, who you all have met with, who we met with not long ago. This wasn't just by accident. These were members who we had contacts with, BWC and UNA, and you could see that literally in the comments that they were making. That those were comments, they were messages that we had shared with them just about the overall importance of the UN, and of course it needs reform. But the notion that you'd throw out the baby with the bathwater was just terrible policy. And so again, just to echo Chris's comments, we have today. You really saw what the impact of our outreach in terms of the statements that were being made, and that matters. It matters because if those, if you saw Democrats and Republicans were relatively silent or piling up on the UN, that makes it much easier to then say, well, we've got to support really severe measures, or we've got to sign on to these, the Granger bill doing this. So certainly we have our work cut out for us, and outreach over the next couple months is important. And I think I talked about this last time, but it's particularly important because we have a situation this year where come April 28th, they're going to Congress, but the appropriators are coming together to pass, they have to come up with a bill to fund the government for the next 6 months. So that decision, that bill passes on April 28th, but that means February and March is when these decisions are being made. So the extent that we can be out there talking with members, talking about the value of the UN is incredibly important, because they're going to be making these decisions much earlier than normal. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer any questions, and it is a absolute crazy time, but it gives me pleasure to know that we've got so many soldiers here manning the ramparts. So happy to take questions.
That's great. If we can, if you want to, how do we get questions, Rachel?
Can you hear me?
Well, can you hear
Yep.
me? There we go.
Yes.
It just we don't have a system tonight, so if someone just jumps in, but just don't talk over each other. We'll see.
Can you hear me?
Hi, this
Yes,
is
Rita. Rita, I heard you first. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you for saying so. I know that we're open mic. I thought it was an open line because we were getting noise when Jody was speaking. Here's my question, and I kind of addressed it to you all, including Jody, earlier this week. The counterexample is when we have treaties coming up, such as the Women's Treaty, and we have a packet of information from the opposing side giving us their arguments. I was asking whether in this case of the defunding, we know or we have a bunch of arguments put forward by those who wish to cut the UN funding. Could we has any organization done that? If not, can we cull supportive arguments that is supportive to getting out of the UN? Could we have some of those sent around? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. You do just kind of talking points, just kind of right at your disposal. Is that what you mean? To counter the opposition?
Yeah, well,
I think she's saying she wants
of the representatives.
Basically, what is the cheat sheet that the Heritage Foundation and others are working from?
That's what I suggested exactly.
Yeah.
And some of and I'm perhaps not being honest in the characterization of the Heritage Foundation. There certainly are some very important figures from Heritage who are involved in this administration already. But I would say that some of the critiques are coming from organizations that are even further to the right and that don't necessarily have a publication record the way that Heritage would. But Jordy, you may have a better sense of what are the best, what are the top 3 information resources in understanding what's motivating this kind of withdraw from the UN, withdraw from the world disposition in the administration.
Sure. Well, I mean, one. So Heritage is one. I mean, Chris is right. They're actually a little bit more nuanced in their argument. I mean, Breitbart, the former home of Stephen Bannon, now the policy advisor. Breitbart is one that is kind of where some of this really anti-international organizations, that these international organizations are just inherently, I'm not sure evil's the word, but they're just out to kind of get the U.S. They cannot be trusted, and that's a little bit where you see it. So it's quite kind of far out on the fringe of that. There is nothing redeemable kind of about these organizations. The moratorium on treaties was if you read it, it's quite remarkable in that way, and that's saying that treaties basically there's nothing that has kind of good has come from them. Then even in the executive order itself, kind of had some very spurious claims about conventions on the rights of the child, about promoting that parents can't spank their kids. I mean, this was actually in the executive order. I've never I'd seen that kind of line in some of the Agenda 21 stuff, but to be actually in a document the president signs to be talking about the UN, will tell parents they can't spank their kids. It just shows you that it's unfortunately some very far right organizations which are providing some of this information. So it's not nuanced. It's the UN is inherently anti-American. It's anti-Israel. Therefore, we shouldn't be funding it. It's really, frankly, that simple. We can provide more. Certainly provide more information to it, but it is not nuanced. I would say the big difference. I mean, in the past, in lobby days where we've talked about different legislation, those bills are 100 pages long, and they're kind of it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts a little bit here. These are very very simple declarations that the UN is fundamentally anti-American and thus we shouldn't fund it.
Jody, I think you slightly misunderstood what I was asking. I think I'm looking for your having compiled, you being you plural, and anybody at the headquarters, having compiled these arguments so that we can have them in a 4 or 5 page docket so we know who's putting what arguments, because some of us may have contacts with those representatives and may be able to counter them, or who knows. But I'm not going over the whole background. I know that. I just want to know, what are you doing to give us artillery that we can use?
And I think that the fundamental artillery that we own as a grassroots movement isn't a nuanced argument. It isn't parrying the belief on the other side. It is quite simply associating ourselves with the UN. Like, that's the association part of UNA. We're on a professional association. It's getting as many Americans as possible to quite simply reach out and say that they believe in the UN. They believe it's in our national interest. And that's the only power we have, the only leverage, because this isn't coming from a nuanced set of arguments of trying to achieve specific objectives and that we can refute the foundational arguments that they're making. It's a guttural scream coming from one end of the political spectrum saying that we as Americans are better if we disassociate ourselves from the rest of the world. It's combined with the economic nationalism arguments. It's combined with the kind of immigration focus that we're seeing on the domestic policy side of the administration. So we can certainly point to sources of information that we're all consuming, but there isn't, a playbook that they have that we're tracking, because it's coming from a much more guttural place.
Can't hear you.
Spectrum.
I think people need to mute their phones. If you're not speaking, please mute your phone right now. Thank you.
How do you mute it?
Stars?
Rita, you're fine. Your line's fine, but everyone else.
Yeah. And Rita Moran is from the East Bay chapter. If you'd identify your name and your chapter when you have a comment or a question. I had a question for you, Jordy, and I appreciate your working late tonight to help us again. Do you have any words of further information about the new cabinet-level appointees and how they're relating to each other? I'm specifically interested in, does Nikki Haley report to Secretary of State Tillerson, or does she report to General Flynn? And do we, a second question is, do we have priority members that we should be making sure that we have our advocacy representatives trying to talk to? We have at least 122 as of today, and with the annual reports, we'll have more of our advocacy leads. So first, Nikki Haley, and either you or Chris could take that, and then who would our priority elected representatives be?
Well, I'll take Nikki Haley, and then Jordy, how about you take priority Hill targets?
Sure.
Nikki Haley, one of the innovations is in this administration. One of the good news things that we were very hopeful about is that most Republican administrations don't have the ambassador to the UN as a cabinet appointee, but the Trump administration did decide to make Haley's position a cabinet position, which means she reports to the president. She doesn't report to Mike Flynn. She doesn't report to Tillerson. Now, certainly the entire staff of the U.S. mission there in New York are State Department employees, so there's this very deeply complex relationship between her and the State Department. Everyone on her staff are State Department employees, but technically she reports to the president. But Jordy, why don't you talk about congressional targets?
Yep, thank you. Chris is right, and I will say in terms of the executive orders,
no talk.
That was a decision we know that was kind of made within the White House inner circle, and Nikki Haley and Tillerson were not part of the initial deliberations on that. And in fact, we're quite confident that when Nikki Haley kind of learned of it, she was quite concerned and expressed those. And in fact, we kind of reached out to her just to see if she was aware, and she hadn't been. So in terms of the executive orders, that was very much an inner circle. In terms of the priority members, so it's somewhat similar to past years with obviously Senator Graham, as we've talked about, Senator Leahy, Congresswoman Granger. On the House side, there's the individual who now has oversight of the state foreign operations budget is Congressman Rogers from Kentucky, former chair of the Appropriations Committee, and then we can provide those, but in terms of kind of the specific targets, particularly as we're planning in February, but the key targets for right now, particularly with that kind of April 28th deadline, but February and March is, as I mentioned before, kind of getting to Graham's office. He's particularly important because he's someone who has kind of acknowledged the importance of the UN in the past, but where the December resolution, he was quite angry, and so walking him back, he's quite he's quite influential. He's seen as an expert on national security. A lot of senators defer to him, so our ability to walk him back will be particularly important. But we'll get you that full the kind of key priority list, so you have them by district and with all their contact information.
But keep in mind that everyone's district, everyone matters. It's particularly with the Safeguard Israel Act that is now moving on the House and the Senate side, which would cut all funding to the UN. That is going to be voted potentially by the full membership if it keeps moving along. So everyone needs to respond, even if your member isn't one of those key appropriators.
That's right, and thank you, Chris. I mean, that's right. So there's now, with the introduction on the House side, so this is now on the Senate side, the House side. These two bills are there. Complete defunding of the UN that puts every member at play. So that means if you're in a district where you have a Congress person who's supportive of the UN, to asking them, please, member of Congress, will you step out on the floor and voice displeasure with this approach? And if you're in a district where you have a more a member who's more skeptical of the UN, to say, please, Congressman, I understand some of your frustrations. We're an organization that supports reform, but this is not the right approach. Republicans and Democrats for decades have said completely defunding the UN is counter to American interests, counter to Israel interests. So that's right. Every single member, this issue is now on the table, and whether it's a supporter or someone who's more opposed to the UN, there's an argument for both.
Can I just jump in to make a comment? This is Ann Nickel from the New York chapter. And I wanted to ask Chris or anyone else, basically, if you, other than the email advocacy that we're doing, is there anything that we could do as far as programs to have a program about the UN and why we're supporting the UN? That's one. And also my contact at the U.S. Mission, who is the NGO liaison, I don't know if you, Chris, got this from Peggy Carey. I don't know if you're in touch with her, but anyway, she sent me something saying that Nikki Haley is spending her first few months learning about the UN and the Security Council, and she will not be meeting with NGOs for a while. Because what we usually do at UNA New York is we, with both administrations, we do have an ambassador program where we ask the ambassadors to come and talk. So there's probably no chance of having her at all at any of our programs for a while. But if you have any suggestions on other things that we could do, that would be great.
Well, I would say, we've got the same issue with Nikki Haley. We had a standing invite that we got to her the second that she was confirmed to speak at our Members Day event, and got the same response that Peggy Carey was sharing there. But programmatically, the most valuable thing that UNA New York, our Manhattan chapter, could do is reach out to Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer is critically important in this entire debate, and has shown some wavering in his support for the UN, I'll say. So programmatically, events where you engage him personally, find a platform using your great, you have a great board, you convene high-profile events, find a platform where you convene Chuck Schumer himself at his convenience.
There are two other New Yorkers. This is David. I'm sorry I was gone, but you've got Nita Lowy and Elliot Engel, who are very influential.
Okay, what are the names? Elliot Engel?
Yeah, he's the ranking minority on House Foreign Affairs Committee, and Nita Lowy is on approach.
Yep, that's right. They're two exactly right. Elliot Engel is the lead Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and Lowy on the appropriations. Very important to reach out.
The UN is in her district, I believe.
With
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm London, and I'm calling from the Detroit chapter. I think this question would be for Jordy. I was wondering, is there any way we could have access to the executive orders on the UN and then the moratorium on the international treaties? Is that information that's public, or because I'd like to actually read that information?
Yeah, it is.
It's not public circulation. There are a couple of articles.
Yeah.
So, Jordy, if you don't have it handy, I can work with Rachel to show those around. We had seen some leaked versions early on that we would not have been able to circulate, but now that there's some media sources that have them on their links, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
This is Mel again. I also think the White House website has them as well. I'm not positive about that.
Well, the key is the UN one. There are a couple. The ones that have not been signed, they're not on the White House website.
Right. So I'm on the White House now, and I don't see them.
Okay.
May I ask a question? This is Olga Widener. Jordy and Chris, would it be too much when we communicate with the White House when you told us to tweet President Trump? Is it too much to say, does the Trump administration really want to be remembered for defunding the UN? Is that too strong?
I'd say get stronger than that.
If we put that question to them, does he really want to go down in history to be remembered as defunding, which means shutting down the UN, essentially, which could result to that?
No, I think you can use that language and stronger languge, too.
Okay, good. We wanted to
I
have
would
your
say
input.
He is a man that I think likes a challenge, so he might, who knows what he would say, but I would say, particularly, these battles are going to be, won in Congress, and our outreach there, the focus there on just how detrimental the policies are, is key. That this, this executive order, is terrible for X, Y, and Z reasons. Those are the things that's going to move the needle with member offices, as opposed to something that looks like it's personal.
I see.
So, and that's something in the past. This isn't the first time we've dealt with individuals who are saying terrible things about the UN, and we've always said, just focus on why the bill or the order, is so bad, because you don't know that member. Maybe they, had dinner with a guy or something like that. So, Trump may want to go down for a lot of reasons. So that might be one of them.
And I mean, quite frankly, I would, he could respond to that, and he's someone who actually pays attention to Twitter, and who knows what he ends up seeing personally. I don't think that he's going to care that much about whether the UN stays or goes. I think that you got to put it in the context of his own ego. So for us to withdraw from the UN, to defund the UN, to de-emphasize the UN, that is us retreating from global leadership. Retreating is not something that he likes to do. So those are the kind of message points that we often weave into our those little scripts and templates in the email actions we send out.
This is Charla Riddle. I'm sorry. This is Charla Riddle. I'm from the Granbury chapter in Texas. I have a question.
Please go ahead. It's so nice to have you. That's our newest chapter in the UNA network.
Right, and because we're in Texas, I think we're in an interesting spot because we can actually reach across the aisle and not really make it a Democratic or Republican issue. And but there is something I think you might want to be aware of. I wrote one of our congressmen, and there was a line in the letter he wrote me back that says, the UN is not the final arbiter, and its decisions should never undermine U.S. sovereignty. That's sort of right out of the Breitbart book and the Steve Bannon playbook. So I thought you might want to be aware of what some of the congressmen are, use language, that sort of that sovereignty language.
No, that's a common refrain. And well, first of all, thank you for responding and reaching out. And the fact that you got a response back means you have been counted. That's the most important thing. And yes, we do get those responses back. Usually it is a absolute mischaracterization of what the UN does, and that the UN is ultimately a place where every nation comes together and fiercely guards their sovereignty. That's what happens in New York. I mean, there is fierce focus, whether you are the smallest nation in the UN system or whether you're the United States, in ensuring that your sovereign prerogatives aren't infringed upon by whatever's going on in the General Assembly or at the Security Council, and that ultimately the only part of the UN that really does have the weight of enforcement in international law is what happens at the Security Council, and we have the veto there. So there are always great arguments to be made against those sovereignty points, but those who believe them, it's just usually they're not looking to argue with anyone. But the fact that they know that there are people in their district who believe differently, it means that when push comes to shove on something, they may listen to the better angels on a different shoulder.
Oh, and one more question. You said the Kay Granger companion bill. Do you happen to know the name of that bill or the number of that bill?
Yeah, well, the Kay Granger bill, it's the same name. It's the Safeguard Israel Act.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Just the congressional version?
That's right. So I'm actually on the site now. The Senate bill has a number. I wouldn't get this all to you. It's 107. The House bill is so new that they don't even have a number yet.
Okay.
I had a House Resolution 769 so far.
No, it wouldn't be.
No.
Well, okay. Yeah. Let me. I'll double check that. If so.
Okay.
This is Bearstock from the Northern California Division. Thank you for the call, as always, and we look forward to the leadership call next week with the bigger audience. The template that was sent around at the beginning of January to send to media was almost immediately overtaken by other things happening. And since there is so much more interest that's been manifested by chapters and genuine all over the country. Could you send an updated template for message to the media? Because I think if this is going to be an ongoing thing, at least we know there is something brewing in the White House and, of course, these other bills, and perhaps they can all be incorporated into a template for the media. Thanks.
Excellent point. And now that we have our new UNA communications officer based in Washington, perfect timing for that guidance. Rachel and I will get back with Lauren on that.
And let me just give.
Thank you.
I would just, Mel, let me just give credit where it's due. You are exactly right. It is HR 769. They didn't have the titles up, so I didn't. But yeah, so the Senate bill is 107, the House bill 769.
I also wanted to thank Herb for pointing out that we are playing a little bit of catch-up because events are going so quickly. One of the best resources that all of us need to digest and then use to build our in-district gatherings is the Better World Campaign website, which has multiple links to what's going on, messaging, everything about the partnership, peacekeeping, taking action. It's a very helpful tool, and if you go to the UNA USA website and click on the advocacy, you will, one of the links is directly to the BWC campaign. So I strongly encourage people to use that. Also, if you're not already on Twitter and feel capable of going on Twitter, like all social media tools, it's better if you use it. So start using it with your friends so that you can begin to understand how it might work with our elected representatives and the White House. So, Jordy, if you could have everything you wanted, when would you target in-district meetings?
Yeah, I mean the president's the February time frame is key. I mean this issue is front and center on people's the thinking about it. This is kind of the time. So I would say certainly February and March are key.
Okay, I think we're going to include, I know we have nearly 50 people on this call. That's a good turnout, but we'll have a bigger turnout on the leadership call next week. So we are going to spend time on the leadership call on advocacy. So I hope all of you that are on the call tonight will also be on that call, where we're going to drill down from online resources to what do you need to pursue an in-district meeting. So I hope that will be useful to all of you. Are there other questions or comments?
While we wait for one, let me pose a question to others. That Jordy quite rightly gave the far more updated schedule for what our in-district advocacy should be, and thank you, Mel, for bringing that up. It means that on the front end, I was still focused on our old timeline schedule of thinking about April, thinking about August, because it's taken me a while to shake myself loose from my comfort zone and realize how urgent everything is. So I'm glad we brought that out. But another part of shaking myself loose from that comfort zone was, when I was down at the Women's March on Washington and seeing so many subsequent other marches, gatherings around this city where I am, and seeing them echoed out in other cities where we have our entire chapter network. So one of my questions to ourselves is, as we move to a much more edgy stance, as we take the gloves off of our advocacy, how are our chapters interacting with those kind of pop-up events, marches, demonstrations? We are a nonpartisan organization. There's no doubt about it. We're not here to be against Trump or any political party. As Jordy mentioned, we have heroic Republican champions for the UN, like Adam Kinzinger. I myself am a registered Republican, as most of you know. But when our values, the value of global engagement and U.S. leadership in the world as manifest through the UN, when that's under jeopardy, we need to find other partners to stand with. So I would love to hear if any of the people on the line have been involved in reaching out to other organizations. I know that my guidance to you when the Women's March was first organized was, hey, let's participate as individuals, but we don't want to fly our banners at that march because we were hoping for a better 100 days from the Trump administration, but it took about all of 24 hours for us to realize that we would need to be a more aggressive stance as UNA USA. So I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts, what they've done, where their interests may lie in partnering with other organizations who may be more aggressive in their posture, but who could be allies.
How about the Indians? This is Tina Halbig from Kentucky Division, and we work closely with AAUW Louisville chapter, and also the Women Graduates of the USA, and they also have a Women Graduates International. But those are very anxious to get more information about this also.
Excellent suggestion.
Hi. Hello?
Go ahead. Identify yourself and go ahead.
This is Tamara Vega-Haddad from the UNA Denver chapter. And I just want to say thank you very, very much for bringing up the march, bringing up the fact that UNA USA did put out a letter that said they did not want their chapters to represent the UN. I think that it was a missed opportunity, completely understandable, but that to be out there with our allies, with like-minded NGOs, strengths in arms. So I want to make sure I hear you right to say that we can now go out and join scientists, if that's what it is, another Women's March, if we can create coalitions of like-minded NGOs and say that we represent the UN.
You can say you represent UNA USA, and ultimately, but first of all, Tamara, thank you.
Of course.
You're exactly right.
Thank you.
And mea culpa. I was wrong. I was wrong.
No, you know what? There is no one wrong in this game. It is a whole new game. And what I appreciate is that you were open, you responded, and we are all growing, we are all evolving, and we have to do it with our head on our shoulders. So thank you.
This is Ginger. I don't know whether I missed something, but UNA Women needs to understand the advocacy position now and how it's evolving.
I think that's a good subsequent discussion for the next UNA Women call.
I think that might be too late. I think we need to galvanize more quickly than we have been doing.
We're going to be learning a more rapid response time in our advocacy affairs. In Pomona Valley here in Southern California, we have the 5 Claremont colleges, and we expect to join some protests that are occurring regarding the refugee travel bans, and so that we are glad that we are now empowered to fly our UNA colors.
And Ginger, this is Rachel. We're gonna have Tita just sent a notice out that the call on Tuesday is going to be offered to all members, and that I'll push for our UNA women leadership to make sure that they're on that call. Whenever we have these pop-up calls, I'll try to get them to be on it, because our next call won't be until the end of February. You're right.
And perhaps also put something up on the website to the extent that anybody uses it, not on the Facebook page.
And here.
Good idea.
This is Herb Bairstock again from California. Another thing that hasn't been raised, and I haven't seen it lately, but a number of chapters out here are talking about, and that is, how can we take advantage of the consternation and frustration and outrage to bring in new members to join us. I'd like to suggest that might be a topic for the call next week, because chapters know that people are pouring in money into a number of NGOs, and people are joining a number of NGOs, and we want to take advantage of those who see us as a window, a vehicle, and a good organization to raise their concerns about staying engaged in the world and working for peace and justice and women's rights or whatever it may be. So I'd like to get it on the agenda somehow and get your advice, and maybe even come up with some kind of very simple postcard or a tweet or things that we in the chapters can use. Thank you.
No, we are indeed. And in fact, I'm actually putting together a rapid response budget, and with some resources that we will be making available to chapters. Things like, can I create a national contract with FedEx Kinko's so that every one of our chapters could have access to $500 worth of printing services, so that if we put up national graphics, so that if folks want to march for International Women's Day with great local organizations, then we could provide some UN-related, Universal Declaration of Human Rights-related imagery, and then also some membership joining material, so that you could also get some allies into the door. Stay tuned on that. We've got to do some more work on it. We've been doing some scrambling this week, but we'll keep you in the loop. But we need to have a broader discussion than just what we're having here on this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jenny from Pasadena, and I was wondering if we've ever contacted ART, because they have their regional office right in Pasadena and 50 million members. Because if we could get into that magazine, I mean, everybody gets it. It would be the best distribution about joining forces, I think of readily.
What's the organization again?
AARP.
Oh, AARP.
I think we've all received a card.
We actually have a strategy of reaching out to AARP, and they have a UN representative that Rachel and I have been busy trying to navigate to. So you and you're thinking along the right lines, Jenny.
Can I say something?
Please.
Can anybody?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm from San Fernando Valley chapter. I'm just wondering here, I mean, like, you're looking for a large group of people, and the situation is serious, and believe me, I just know the tip of it. Believe me, I'm not well informed at all. But you've got a lot, and I just feel it might not be proper, socially, politically correct or whatever to say this. You've got so many people. You've got Indian reservations here. You've got this whole United States was covered. I've got a map of it from Elaine Trogman, who just passed away from our San Fernando Valley chapter, and she gave me a bunch of stuff because this was like her life's mission, all of this, and they inhabited every single state. So, you reach out for all these NGOs, and you've got Indians. What are the Indians? Indigenous people who live here where the land, where they have their casinos, they own it. And the law of their Indian law is the law that is upheld on their land. And there are attorneys that are educated in the law that they have to abide by when they're on their land. I bet none of you ever reach out to an Indian population and ask them, what do they feel about the United Nations? Do you want to join the United Nations? How does the United Nations benefit the Native American Indian population? Because you've got a lot of people that if they cared about it, you probably have a large following. I would like someone, has this ever crossed anybody's mind? Have they paid attention to that population?
That is an excellent point. And what I would say is we do have some chapters who are very engaged on. There's a forum within the UN, the Indigenous Peoples Forum. It is one of the most important bodies within the UN system, and it convenes all the time, and it brings together indigenous peoples from around the globe and deals with the kind of the tension between member states, nation states, and indigenous peoples. And I would say our Hawaii chapters in particular have been some of the best leaders. They'll bring entire delegations to the New York for those Indigenous Peoples Forums, but some of the other chapters too. But we have not focused on it in a strategic way. And this
maybe
is
you need them. Maybe you do need them.
You're right.
Yeah, we have a Native American on our board here in Pomona Valley, and we've definitely had their perspectives. We are out of time tonight, I am sorry to say, but I think if I may ask Ginger one last time to remind us of Members Day coming up, and is there a way to follow Members Day online? It's a wonderful opportunity to get an update on what's going on in New York.
Thanks, Mel. We have confirmed, I think today, that we expect to have the President of the General Assembly as our keynote speaker in the morning, and we're very excited that Kathy Calvin, who heads the UN Foundation, will speak in the afternoon, along with the young woman who is the youth delegate to the UN from the U.S. The materials are now online. We have a few spaces open if you have not already chimed in. And we expect that UN Web TV will be broadcasting on the day, and we'll make that information available. It's very easy just to watch it streaming live, and then it will be archived.
Wonderful.
So
we look
forward to seeing
I will also. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being there. We have several people from Southern California coming. It's going to be great. It always is. I will, if you're a friend of mine on Facebook, I always post from Members Day to my Facebook account and to Southern California UNA Facebook page. So please join us on the 17th. Thanks again. Any final words, Chris or Jordy?
None at all, other than thank you. And we've had 50% greater turnout on this call than our last Advocacy Leads call. We're moving in the right direction. We need to keep that kind of trend line. And thank you, Mel, for your leadership, and thank you for the time of everyone on this call.
Thank you.